And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to talk about the concept of elasticity. That's what we've been talking about on this playlist. But now we're going to talk about the concept of cross elasticity. So in previous podcasts, we've been talking about, how does the price, the change in the price of a good affect the quantity of a good that somebody buys? How does a change in the price of Pepsi affect the amount of Pepsi that people buy? But now we're going to shift this, and we're going to do what we call cross elasticity. So we're going to cross from talking about the price of one good to the quantity of some other good. So instead of saying maybe, how does a change in the price of Pepsi affect the quantity of Pepsi that people buy, we're now going to say things like, how does the price of Pepsi affect the amount of Coke that people buy? So we're going to cross from looking at the price of one good to the quantity of another good. So the way that I have it written here, we have the elasticity of cross elasticity, which I have here some good X and some good Y. That's the cross right there. And sometimes I'll just write it like this. I'll just write cross elasticity or whatever, however you want to designate that. So what I'm saying here is that we have the percent change in the quantity of some good X divided by the percent change in the price of some other good Y. In other words, we write it the way I've been writing it on the previous podcast. We have the change in the quantity of X divided by the midpoint X, all divided by the change in the price of Y divided by the midpoint Y. So how does a percent change in the price of Y affect the percent change in the quantity of some good X that people buy? That's what we're doing. And when we do this, when we did the regular demand or price elasticity on previous videos, the key number was 1. It was whether or not the elasticity was greater than or less than 1. Now that's going to change. Now signs are going to matter, and what's going to matter is whether or not your ultimate elasticity answer is greater than 0 or less than 0. That's now going to be the key. So when we talk about cross elasticity, it is the number 0 that is the key, and signs matter, and you'll see what I mean as we go through some examples. So let's just go through 2 examples of this, and then I think you'll have the idea. So my first example, and we're going to use midpoint when we do this. So we're going to say when the price of hamburgers increases from $2 to $3, that's one good hamburger. The price of hamburgers goes up to from $2 to $3. When that happens, we also see in the market that the quantity of hot dogs increases from 10 purchase per day to 15 purchase per day, say at some store. And so this is cross elasticity because we are crossing goods. We're talking about the price of hamburgers compared to the quantity of hot dogs. So now it just kind of becomes a math problem, at least here at the beginning. So we just are going to, plug these numbers into our formula. So we're going to have a change in the quantity of hot dogs divided by the midpoint quantity of hot dogs, and then that all gets divided by a change in the price of hamburgers, all divided by the midpoint price for hamburgers. So then we just go ahead and we plug our numbers in. So my change in quantity went from 10 to 15, and signs matter. So that would be a positive number. It increased from 10 to 15. So my change in quantity would be 10 divided by my midpoint quantity. My midpoint quantity would be the midpoint between these two, and that you could also say it's the average. So we did this on earlier videos, but you could take 10 plus 15 divided by 2. Your midpoint would be 12.5. Your midpoint would be 12.5. And then all that gets divided by a change in the price of hamburgers, which was 1. The price of hamburgers went up by $1. All divided by the midpoint price. The midpoint price, again, 2 plus 3 divided by 2, it gives you the average or the midpoint, so that would be 2.5. And then it becomes a calculator exercise. You plug it in your calculator, and your ultimate answer is going to be 1 divided by 1. And remember, I like to say it this way, 1 divided by 1. Now, let's be done with the math and let's turn this into economics. What does that 1 divided by 1 mean? That means on the top, the percent change in the quantity was 1% in the quantity of hot dogs. The percent change in the price of hamburgers was 1%. So we would say a 1% increase in the price of hamburgers, a 1% increase in the price of hamburgers, that's down here in the denominator, caused a 1% increase in the quantity of hot dogs, and that was up here in the numerator. So a 1% increase in the price of hamburgers caused a 1% increase in the quantity of hot dogs, And so what is my conclusion? What conclusion can I draw? My conclusion that I would draw from all this is I would say that whenever the cross elasticity is greater than 0. In this case, it is. It's greater than 0, right? The cross elasticity is equal to 1. If you wanted to just write it separately, that cross elasticity is equal to 1. Let me just separate these. The cross elasticity is equal to 1. If the cross the cross elasticity is clearly greater than 0. Whenever that's true, we can say that the two goods in question are substitutes. The two goods in question are substitutes for each other. So let's just think through that they're substitutes. Let's just think that through and make sure that it's true. So if the price of hamburgers goes up, people will buy fewer hamburgers. And when they buy fewer hamburgers, they go buy more hot dogs instead. So we're saying that hot dogs and hamburgers, at least according to this data, would be substitutes for each other. Okay, so it's really important to do this cross elasticity because sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't know whether two goods are substitutes or complements. Hot dogs and hamburgers, are they substitutes and complements? Do people buy them together for picnics, or do they buy one instead of the other? And so we run the numbers and we come up with an answer. Okay, substitutes in this case with the data that I have. All right, so let's do one other example of this. So one other example of this. Now we're gonna switch this around, and we're gonna say we're just gonna change goods here. Now it's going to be the price of hot dog buns increases from $2 to $3. And the quantity, when that happens, the quantity of hot dogs purchases declines from 10 per day to 8 per day. So, all right, what do? We set up our formula. So my formula is going to be the change in the quantity of hot dogs, all divided by the midpoint quantity of hot dogs. Here, let me move this over here a little bit. I'm going to come over here. Let me rewrite that. The change in the quantity of hot dogs over the midpoint quantity of hot dogs, all divided by a change in the price of hot dog buns divided by the midpoint price of hot dog buns. Okay, so it's the same formula. Now we've just changed the goods a little bit, but we're still cross elasticity because we're crossing from buns to hot dogs themselves. So the change in the quantity, that was -2, so that matters that it's negative right there. Okay, signs matter. So the change in the quantity was -2 divided by the midpoint quantity, which is going to be between 10 and 8. That's going to be 9. All divided by the change in the price. The change in the price was a +1. All divided by the midpoint price, which was 2.5. And so now again, we run the numbers, we plug it into the calculator, and I ended up with a number of -0.55 over 1. -0.55 over 1. And so what's my conclusion? What does that mean? And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kind of squeeze this in here. That means here's the change in the price in the denominator, change in the quantity in the numerator. So it's a 1% increase in the price of in the price of the hot dog buns. A 1% increase in the price of buns caused a 0.55% decrease in the quantity of hot dogs that people bought. Okay, So when the price, let's think this through. When the price of buns went up, people buy fewer hot dog buns, and if they buy fewer hot dog buns, they buy fewer hot dogs as well. So that sounds like these goods are complements. They get purchased together. So if the price of hot dog buns goes up, then that means that people will buy fewer hot dog buns. They will also buy fewer hot dogs as well. So I could say my conclusion here, and I'm sorry if this is blocked out over here. My conclusion, we'll put over here. My conclusion. Let me just change my color. My conclusion over here is going to be that whenever the cross elasticity is less than 0, which it is here, it's a negative number. Whenever the cross elasticity is less than 0, then the goods are complements. They are complementary goods. They're complements. And by the way, if you're forgetting from an older video, when we say substitutes are goods that get consumed in place of each other. Complements are goods that get consumed together. So if you do cross elasticity, if you do the calculation for two goods, you do the cross elasticity. If that cross elasticity is greater than 0, then we say the goods are substitutes. If that cross elasticity is less than 0, then we say that the goods are complements. All right, so that's cross elasticity. Hope that helps. Thanks for joining me on another video. This is Mr. Hagan, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast.